and I'll crush you like a paper cup.
So now we get to the segment everyone's been waiting for. They want to know who our must starts, who our must sits are, crushes and our busts. Before we do that, though, we do have a question coming in from Jacob. He wants to know, because this is a star sit question anyway, Bucky Irving, that is, Tony Pollard or Javonte Williams as a flex this week. Adam, what do you got?
Oh, that's tough. I think I want to lean towards Pollard. Look, I would love to go with Irving here. I just don't quite have the cojones to do it. Look, it's a tough matchup. It's just kind of tough projecting the splits in that backfield week to week. So if you're looking for a little bit more upside, Irving could be your guy. I'm not going to deny that because that's a fantastic matchup. I would love to get into it, but I just, again, kind of thinking about the splits of workload, that's where I would want to lean.
I have Bucky Irving slightly ahead right now. Now, a lot of this is going to have to do with Tajay Spears available, because remember, he's coming back from concussion. He had practice limited capacity today. If he can't go, I will be moving Pollard ahead of Bucky Irving, because then he'll get the full-on work share. So that's going to depend on for me. But I do like, as of now, assuming Spears plays, I like the matchup for Bucky Irving more. Javonte thing, look, it could be Aldrich Estime this week for all we freaking know. And so I'm not trusting that any shape, way, or form. Wendy came in with a question. I have a trade offer of McConkey for my Najee. He needs a running back. I have David Montgomery, I have Kenneth Walker, a couple of scrubs on my bench, but I could use a wide receiver. Chris, would you do this deal?
I was skeptical of the deal until I saw that Wendy is starting Keyshawn Butte right now. So I would actually pull that trigger, because I think McConkey, especially with the matchup versus the Ravens this week, is an advantageous matchup to have. I would pull the trigger for Najee. I like to have their RB depth, but I think you need to upgrade that receiver for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, also, I'm sorry, Wendy, get a hold of me. I still got your signed Deontay Johnson jersey from the Expo to give you. So get a hold of me.
Is that the same Wendy?
Oh, yeah. That's Wendy Early.
Wendy. We're trying to give stuff to you.
That's our girl.
We're trying to get stuff to you. We got to send us in the message in there. Yeah, Chris, I had the same thought you did originally, which is I don't want anybody else to have running back depth. But yeah, when you're that desperate at wide receiver, you gotta do it. All right, one last question till we get to Adam for his crush here from Darren. Disley, Andrews, or Tucker Kraft at tight end this week? Disley's been on a tear lately. Chase, what do you think?
Tough there, because it's Mark Andrews. Is always going to be Mark Andrews, but he just seems so volatile this season. Tucker Kraft has been really good, but he's facing a San Francisco team that has been really, really tough against opposing tight ends. And then we've got Will Disley out there, who has kind of just been sneakily scoring points on us. I think I'm going to lean towards Mark Andrews, just because I know that it's Mark Andrews, and any given week he can pop off. But yeah, it's weirdly, it's a lot closer question than it would have seemed before the season.
I do agree it's a lot closer. I do have Mark Andrews, my ranked 9 tight end this week, so I have him ahead of the group. The biggest thing that came down for me is Isaiah Likely being back is annoying, but
yes,
the mismatch against the Chargers is a tight end. It's not going to be the wide receivers this week. Yeah. I do think Andrews has the best chance of that group for a touchdown. I know, disrespect to Will Disley, but I'm sorry, it ain't the guy who I'm going to be leaning on for this week. We know that'll come back down the earth. We've seen stretches like that before. Okay, Luke, hang on to your question. We'll get to you in a minute. Adam, I want to get to you. Who's your crush of the week, Adam?
Yeah, my crush this week is Austin Ekeler. Kind of a similar vibe to the DFS segment earlier. I'm just trying to get into that matchup any way I can. And I think Austin Ekeler being the ECR running back 26 is the spot for me to do it, at least against the ECR. Look, he combines, having an awesome rushing matchup with that receiving floor, especially in half point and full point PPR. Look, he's only had 2 games this season with 10 plus carries. I get that, but he scored very well in both of those games. And look, he doesn't need a ton of carries to feel pretty good about it. One of the good things this season relative to last is with the shortened workload, he has looked a lot better. He has looked a little bit more explosive. And the biggest thing is he gets a lot more red zone looks than you'd expect. Now, I want to throw it out here before I mention these numbers that obviously Brian Robinson Jr. has missed some time, so this is it's closer than it actually is, but it's still closer than you would expect, even accounting for that, and that Austin Ekeler has 20 red zone rushing attempts on the season, and Brian Robinson is at 27. Again, missed a couple games from Brian Robinson, but for a guy who's averaging less than 10 attempts a game to have 20 of them be in the red zone, I mean, they're trying to use Austin Ekeler as the smaller guy in the red zone at least a couple times a game, and this is a team who they're at, or at least when I looked, their over-under team total was at 28, right? So 3 touchdowns and a couple field goals or 4 touchdowns. So we're having some opportunities playing the numbers. I think he's got a solid chance to get the end zone, which is good for fantasy value. He could easily break a reception. I think to me, I don't think it's crazy off of ECR, but I consider him much more of a low to mid-end RB2 than I do a high-end RB3, making him technically a must-start as an RB2.
You saw a lot of the pony backfield last week out of Washington, too, where they're utilizing both those guys.
Yeah, look, synopsis, what Adam just said, do you have a running back? Are they playing Dallas? Then play him. I mean, that's pretty much what it boils down to right now, essentially. Luke came in back with another question, another tight end question, another one surrounding Will Dissly. Who would you start at Dissly, Tucker Kraft, or Laporta? Chris, what would you do there?
I will go with Sam Laporta on that one. I know that's the guy coming back from injury, but I think right now Detroit's showing you they're trying to get all their playmakers involved as much as possible. Whenever those guys are healthy, they come back, they get touchdowns almost automatically. I'm going to talk about Will Dissly a little bit later, so that's where I'm going to stick with Laporta right there of those 3 guys.
And Luke asking, does Jayden Daniels stay in the whole game against Dallas? Is what he's worried about. He's stayed in the whole game since he's been hurt, so I'm not worried about it any more so than I would be any other week against Dallas here. Okay, Chris, talking to you. Crush, what do you got?
Well, we guys talked about some of these guys earlier, so I'm going to kind of cheat, Dan, and I'm going to say Tampa Bay backfield in general. I love both the backs, Rashad White and Bucky Irving, and ECR is in both the mid-20s, or I mean 22, 23, I think it was. I think both of those guys are must-starts, and Baker Mayfield at number 10. Baker Mayfield is going to light it up if he gets Mike Evans back this week. You're going to see touchdowns galore versus that Giants defense. I love Baker as a play as well. I have a crush on the Bay backfield.
Yeah, hard to argue there. I actually have both inside my top 20 this week, so I'm right in line with you. Chase, who you crushing on this week, big guy?
I brought him up earlier. I was sad I couldn't trade for him in that question, but Jackson Smith-Njigba was my crush this week. He's been on a tear the last month or so. His last 3 games, he's got over 30 targets. He's seen red zone targets in that offense, which we didn't necessarily expect from him. And as you actually, Dan, alluded to, in your observations over at FantasySportsAdviceNetwork.com, he looks to have finally eclipsed Lockett as an option in that pass-heavy offense there. He's running out of the slot. The Cardinals give up the 6th most fantasy points in the league to opposing running backs out of the slot. They give up the 12th most points overall to wide receivers. This should be a close game shootout, I think. So JSN is a top 16 play for me this week, even though he's ranked around 1920 ECR right now. He's a top 16 for me. I love Jackson Smith-Njigba. Fire him up.
Yeah, that plays into my guy, who I love this week a lot more than ECR does. So Marvin Harrison, wide receiver 22 on ECR. I got about wide receiver 11 this week. He's had a few weeks where he has cracked the top 12. I expect this to be one of those weeks as well. We've seen his target share kind of tick up to 24% over the last 4 games, which is kind of that solid high-end wide receiver 2 territory, and it depends on your efficiency and productivity. And Seattle's giving up the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers, especially over the last 4 games. They've allowed either a touchdown or a 100-yard performance to an opposing wide receiver. We saw Juwan Jennings just have a strong game against them. It's one of the few defenses where you can leave a perimeter wide receiver out there isolated, never move him around, and he can still have a good game because you can attack those corners out there. So that plays right into what the Cardinals are doing with Marvin Harrison right now. 2 middling defenses. Could be, Chase, to your point, a mini little shootout here. The 4th highest game over under total of the week. So Marvin Harrison, I think, cracks the top 12 and must be a play for you this week. All right, so we had another Dominic, I'm going to stop you right there. I'm leading the charge. Jalen Waddle must sit no matter what your option is. So, yes, I will sit Jalen Waddle and go with Xavier Legette. That's how bad it's gotten. I'm going to start a Carolina wide receiver over Jalen Waddle. All right, so we got to switch gears. Go or bust. Talk about the guys that we're either outright sitting or not having as high expectations for this week. And now I was about to poo-poo on one of my answers I gave to the viewers a little bit earlier. But Adam, what's your bust here for the week?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but it is Mark Andrews. Look, he's been a guy who we've seen him twice this season, even in full point PPR. We talk half point PPR this show typically. But even in full point PPR without a receiving touchdown, he's reached double digits twice this season. Look, I don't know if you guys know this. The Chargers have not given up a receiving touchdown to a tight end. They've given up a ton of yards. They have hemorrhaged yards at the position. They have not given up a receiving touchdown to the position. Once we get into the red zone, they are clamping down on the tight end position. And this is not a team that has had the easiest tight end schedule in the world either. They have had matchups against Bowers, Kelsey, McBride, Njoku, Taysom Hill. And look, I understand that throwing McBride in there, sure, doesn't count. He can't get in the end zone regardless, it seems. So maybe that one doesn't matter. We can throw that one to the side. But he's a talented tight end, right? And these, again, are guys who have gotten yards against them. In PPR, these guys have been useful. I'm just curious how much Mark Andrews is the guy outside of the red zone to where I can trust him as a starter. So for me personally, I'm preferring to play guys like Ertz, who is the ECR tight end 14, Laporta, who is the ECR tight end 16, and even Cole Kmet with an interesting matchup against Minnesota at the tight end 18 over Mark Andrews. That one could more of a toss-up than a straight-up, but definitely the first two I would much rather have than Mark Andrews, just given how the Chargers have played in the red zone.
Oh, man. Look, Ertz I can give you because I have Andrews only one spot ahead of Ertz. So I kind of have them going back and forth. So I can get up before on that. But man, Laporta he doesn't get targeted. He's a Jalen Waddle of tight ends right now. He's not part of the offense. That's tough. I can't fully disagree though that Andrews, just like every other back end tight end one, is going to be extremely hit or miss this upcoming week. Chris, who's your bust this week?
Speaking of hit or misses, a guy that came up in a lot of our questions, and that's Will Dissly. Look, Will Dissly had his first touchdown of the season last week. Number one, only one of the season. His second game over 80 yards. He's had 2 games over 80 yards. Previous all other games, high was 41 yards, which you usually get from Will Dissly is about 3 to 5 catches and about 20 to 40 yards. For ECR's tight end 7, no thank you. I know the Ravens, everybody gets excited about playing the Ravens. They did a pretty good job about Pat Freiermuth last week. I think he had 2 catches for 14 yards, I believe. Will Dissly going to be closer to that than he is from last week. Will Dissly is not a guy that I'm excited to have in my lineup, and I would advise you not to have in yours.
Chris is poo-pooing on what is right now the hot.
And I liked Will Dissly. Dan knows this. He crapped on about Will Dissly earlier in the year about Will Dissly and Dynasty, but there's no way I can sit there and vouch for a guy who had 1 touchdown for the first time last week.
Yeah, and it's not like Justin Herbert just started throwing the ball. He's been throwing the ball pretty well for the past couple of weeks. So,
and it was versus Cincinnati. Everybody gets touchdowns versus Cincinnati as a tight end position.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. The Will Dissly train's gotten a little too out of his skis. We have a question coming in here. Jacob, Love or Daniels this week? Jacob, it's Daniels regardless because he's playing Dallas this week. Here's what I will say. Love right now is my QB 14. If we find out Nick Bosa is not playing in this game because he's dealing with the 2 obliques, Jordan Love will get into my top 10 this week. So that's going to have a big difference as far as what the values could be a lot closer. But regardless, it's Daniels. I'm not passing up the matchup against Dallas. I think he gets running again this particular week. So with that, we pivot over to Chase, who is your bust of the week.
Bust this week is going to be Chuba Hubbard. He's been a great story this season on an otherwise abysmal Carolina offense, but he's going up against Kansas City Chiefs this week. And we kind of alluded to it earlier, but as if the Chiefs aren't going to be motivated enough and angry enough coming off their first loss of the season to the Bills they're also giving up the fewest points to opposing fantasy running backs. And oh yeah, Dave Canales came out this week now, and he said he fully expects Jonathan Brooks to finally make his debut in week 12 here, coming off that knee injury and coming off the Panthers bye as well. Listen, Hubbard has raked the last couple of weeks against the Saints and the Giants, but he's not getting, a buck and a half on the ground here against the Kansas City Chiefs like he did last week in Germany or last time he was out in Germany against the Giants. But when he doesn't get in the end zone, his scoring's been pretty pedestrian for the most part this weekend. We're going to have to watch the usage pattern really, for the next couple of weeks here in the Carolina backfield to see how they're deploying Hubbard versus Brooks. Again, I don't expect them to dump the whole load on Brooks, no matter how high of draft pick he was. He just stepped out of the blue tent, but Chuba Hubbard's a running back 11 on the year. He's outside my top 20 this week. There's just too much stacked against him here between Brooks coming back, the fact that it's the Chiefs defense. I don't want to have to be relying on Chuba Hubbard if that's who you've been relying on this season.
I agree the Chiefs defense is a bad rap, but I have a hard time believing his first week back making his NFL debut, he's going to have much more of a role than Miles Sanders would have. And Miles Sanders is going to be out this week. It's hard for me to see it from that standpoint, but I am with you. I do have him outside my top 20, still in my top 24 though this week, just because of the volume I expect him to still get. Remember, they just paid.
He's a low end RB2 this week, matchup alone, regardless of whether Brooks is playing or not. Yeah.
I agree with that. Okay. So my bust this week, near and dear to my heart, not only is he on my favorite team, but I actually own him in quite a few places. And I just had to look myself in the face and say, you know what? I just have to have lower expectations for you. You might not have a better option this week because there's 6 teams on bye. So you may still have to play this guy. And if it wasn't for 6 teams being on bye, he'd be ranked as a wide receiver 3. As it is, though, Deebo Samuel, who's the ECR wide receiver 15 right now, is my wide receiver 24. He's on the decline, guys. He's only averaging 2.6 yards of separation. That's a full yard less than his worst mark at any other point in his career. And right now, the way Kyle Shanahan's been scheming up the team, it's not helping matters. He's been the second worst yards after catch over expected in his career since his rookie season. He's only had 1 receiving touchdown in the year, only 2 total touchdowns this season. They're struggling in the red zone as a team. They can't get anything going. That's usually where he makes his heyday. He makes his heyday on motion and mismatches and created, yak opportunities. None of that is coming to fruition right now out of Kyle Shanahan, who has a different excuse every single week as to why that's even the case. The Packers have only allowed the 10th least fantasy points to the wide receivers. And look, they play a heavy zone scheme. So if there's ever going to be a chance for Deebo to maybe do something, it's when he plays against zone. But even we've seen zone-heavy teams approach the 49ers with man concepts. I don't know if the Packers are going to be the exception. I don't know if they just stick to what they do. But this is pretty much going to be a last-ditch opportunity for Deebo to not just be a wide receiver 3 in my book for the rest of the season. Jaylor Alexander's not expected to play, so between that and the scheme, he might be able to get some headway. But if it's not this week, I don't think we're looking at Deebo Samuel as more than a wide receiver 3 the rest of the year. And for this week, I have lower expectations, and he's only in my top 24 because of the 6 teams on bye. That wraps it up for the show, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow with Dr. Brian Scott to talk about some of the injuries coming up in Week 12. Make sure you tune in on Fantasy Football Advice Network, subscribe on our YouTube channel, and download Operation Domination Football on all of your favorite podcast apps so you can listen to us while you're on the go. Until then, guys, good luck. We'll talk to you. Hey there, I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.
Post show, as always,